In today's video, I'm going to be teaching you how to build this super easy and fun cabin bird feeder. And one of the greatest things about this build is it's built out of, you guessed it, fence pickets. So before we jump into the build for this, I want to give a special shout out to Lowe's Home Improvement, who is the sponsor of today's video. And it's a great place to pick up some fence pickets. Let's jump in. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to need for this super easy bird feeder is going to be wood. And you can either use an old piece of wood, kind of like this. I'm going to say that you're not a wood hoarder like I am and you're starting from scratch. If you're using new material, go ahead and stain it the color that you want. That's going to kind of make it look like a cabin. So for me, I wanted this rustic brown look. And the good thing about this project is you do not have to sand this thing down to smooth. You actually want that kind of rough, rustic look. So the first thing that I'm going to do is to rip my material down to 5 1/8 inch wide. So now with our board ripped down to size, we need to cut grooves in this board. And the purpose of this grooves is to make it look like that we have a bunch of small logs stacked together, without actually having to rip these down into 1-inch strips and stack them all up. And as always, I'll be teaching you step by step on how to build this bench, but if you're a plans in the hand type of person, head over to my website. I'll throw a link in the description. So in order to get this look, let's start off by setting our table saw to 1/8 of an inch, and then we'll set our fence to 5 inches. So with these settings, our first pass through the saw will leave a groove on the very edge of the board about 1/8 of an inch wide. Once we have that, we'll move our fence over to 4 inches to make a second groove. And then we're just going to repeat this process, moving our fence into 3 inches, 2 inches, and 1 inch, cutting a groove at each of those settings. Now for this last groove, it's going to be on an outside edge. So instead of setting my fence directly up against the blade, I'm going to set it back to 5 inches, flip my board over, and cut it that way. Now with your 1/8 inch grooves cut, you should have something that looks like this. Okay, so now that we have our little log grooves put in, let's go ahead and take a sander to this and just kind of round these over a little bit. It's just going to add to this cabin look. Another way that you can get this look, if you do not want to use a sander, is to simply take a piece of sandpaper, fold it in half, and run it down your grooves. This will knock off the sharp edges, giving each section a rounded look. So now that we have our material sanded down the way that we want it, let's go ahead and cut the parts for our sides. For this, we're going to be needing 2 boards that are 14 inches long and 2 boards that are 10 inches long. Okay, so now that we have our sides cut, these small ones, they're actually going to be the front and backs, and these long pieces are actually going to be the long sides where the feed will come out. Now we need to cut the ends of these so that they kind of interlock like this, kind of like an old cabin. You always notice that the logs are actually sticking out past each other. So in order to do that, we're going to have to remove some material from each one of these boards. Let's go ahead and start by getting our short boards laid out. Okay, so first we're going to designate the top and the bottom. This is going to be our bottoms. And then starting at our bottom log, we're going to measure 1 inch in and make a mark. We're actually going to be removing this material. Also make sure to mark your gaps in between. We'll be removing this material as well. And then we'll skip the next log and do the exact same thing for the center one. Skip this one and we'll be removing the top. And make the exact same marks on the opposite side. Now I'm not going to be measuring out my second one just yet. Once I get this one cut, I'll use it as a template. For each of the sections that I'm going to be cutting out, I'm going to make sure to start my blade against the section that I'm going to be removing. I'll make sure to do this for both sides of each piece. This will leave a thin strip of the groove that will match up to the connecting sidewalls. To make sure that my cuts are straight and the same depth, I'm just going to use a speed square as a guide. And for removing parts that are in the center, we'll just have to start at one edge, angle the cut in, and then square it up. Now with our first side cut, let's just repeat this for the opposite side. Okay, so now that we have both of our short boards cut, I'm actually going to use this as a template for the long boards as well. So all that we'll have to do is line these up just like this, and then mark our long boards where they need to be cut. So the material directly behind these that are sticking out is what we need to cut. So let's go ahead and mark those with an X just to make sure that we don't cut the wrong parts. Now that we have those marked, let's measure these out to the same 1 inch placement that we did for our sides, and then connect our 2 lines. Now let's go ahead and make these cuts, and then we can repeat this for the opposite side. Okay, so now with our long side cut, we're going to do the exact same thing as we did for our short ones. Just lay this over the top, trace this out, cut those out, and then we're ready to start putting this thing together. So now we just start to assemble our parts. You can always shave off a bit. All right, so now that we know that everything is going to fit together, let's go ahead and assemble this thing. Now at this point you have a couple of different options. Let's say that you wanted to put some windows in the sides, things like that. You would do it before you put this together. Just be a lot easier. For me, I'm just going to attach all of that from the outside. So to put this thing together, we're just going to be using some wood glue and brad nails. And don't get too carried away with the wood glue. Remember that some of this is going to be sticking out. So before this wood glue starts to dry, I'm going to go ahead and throw in some brad nails. Then we'll make sure that everything is square and clamp it up. Alright, so while we're waiting for that to dry, let's go ahead and take what's left of our first board and cut our gables. For the gables, we're going to be using the exact same materials we did for the walls. And we'll be needing 2 of these that are 10 inches long from tip to tip. And to get this, we'll simply set our miter saw to 45 degrees to make these cuts. Now you can either use 2 10-inch boards for this, or you can do like I'm doing and simply flip the board over after each cut. Okay, so with our gables cut, we have a couple of different options on attaching these. You can either glue this down and maybe counterbore some holes here for some screws, or if you have a pocket hole jig, put a couple pocket holes in the back. That's what I'm going to do. With the drill bit set for the thickness of my material, I'll be installing 2 pocket holes in the back side of each gable. Now that I have my pocket holes cut, I'll go ahead and install my gables on each end. For this, we just want to make sure that the tips of our gables are lining up with the edges of our end boards. Okay, so now with our gables attached, we're going to be installing these 1-inch strips in between our gables, like this, on both sides. And what this is going to do is give us something to attach our roof to. So these 1-inch strips can be any thickness. Honestly, they can just be scraps. But they are going to need to fit in between your 2 gables, which should be right around 12 inches, depending on the thickness of the material that you're using. So I have 4 of these strips already cut, so let's install 2 on each side. Since we need to install 2 of these on each side, you'll be needing 4 of these 1-inch strips. The main thing to consider when installing these is that they need to be installed at the same angle as the roof. And just to be on the safe side, I recommend custom cutting each one of these just because the thickness of material can vary. Oops. Okay, so I had a blowout here with my nail, and I know exactly why, and I know better. When I went to install that nail, I had my nail gun angled like this instead of the way that it should have been, which would have been flat with the board that I was nailing into. By angling my nail gun, I gave it a way to actually kick out. Whereas if I'd been square with my material, this would have stayed inside. So, lesson learned. Luckily in this case, the nail blowout really didn't hurt anything. Now let's try this again doing it the correct way. So now for our roof. So this is where you can use that fence picket or piece of material that you bought from the store that was supposed to have been 5/8 or 3/4 of an inch, and it was only like this. Yeah, we've all been there, and I have several of these boards that are probably only 3/8 of an inch thick on one side. This is going to be perfect for that. So for the roof panels, we're going to stick with 5-inch wide material. Again, this can be fence picket material, pallet wood, and honestly, it really doesn't even have to be 5 inches wide. Let's say that you're building yours like mine and that your material is 1/2 of an inch thick. We're going to be needing 3 boards that are 9 inches long and 3 boards that are 8.5 inches long. All right, so now that I have my roof boards cut, again, we have our 9-inch and our 8.5-inch boards. We're going to start off with the 8.5-inch boards. And to install these, I'm just going to be using brad nails and some wood glue and attaching them directly to the boards that we just put on. Since we're going to have a 1-inch overhang on each side, we'll measure out our first board allowing for this 1-inch overhang while making sure that it stays flush with the top. And the reason why we need this completely flush with the top is because our 9-inch board will end up overlapping this one. All right, so I almost messed up here. I actually want to put some wood glue on the bottom of this as well. And I didn't, but luckily I've only put 1 nail in, so it kind of pivots. Now we're ready. Now with my first one installed, I can just line the rest of these up with the top. Now I'm choosing to put the rough side of this material out. I think it's just going to add to the look. Now for this back side, we're going to need to determine which side is going to be the front and which side is going to be the back. The reason for this is so we can make an access panel in the back of this for refilling the feeder. So now that I know which side is going to be my back, I can go ahead and attach my first 2 boards, making sure that I do not put wood glue where my 3rd board is going to go. So for my last roofing board, I actually want this to be able to move up and down. That way we can have access to the inside. I'm just going to be using a simple hinge for this. I could just install this just like this, It's going to make the edge stick up and be really noticeable. So in the center of this board, I'm going to trace out my hinge and remove about 1/8 of an inch of material. Now you can do this with a box cutter or a chisel or really whatever that you would like. If you happen to have an oscillating tool, this is the perfect job. Now that I have my hinge notch in place, I'm going to go ahead and pre-drill and install my screws. And if your material is too thin for your screws, you could actually put this notch on the other side of the hinge and not have to worry about it. Actually, in hindsight, I should have made this recessed part for my hinge right here instead of on this board. Then I wouldn't have had to worry about the depth of my screw. But you know what they say about hindsight. Now we'll attach the other side of our hinge and we're ready to move on. So now that we have our hinged access, let's go ahead and secure each one of these sides and then we'll move on to the base. But before we do that, since Lowe's was nice enough to be the sponsor of today's video, I figured that I should show them some support in return and pick up a new tool that I've been wanting to try out. So a lot of you all know that I have a cordless brad nailer, but I choose to use the pneumatic version. Why? It's because my current cordless version is bulky and I cannot see where my brad nail is going. So whenever I noticed that Cobalt put out a 24-volt brushless version that has a very slim tip, I put it on my wish list and figured that this would be the perfect time to try it out. So for the rest of this video, I'm going to be using this nailer for the first time, and I'll let you know what I think. So let's go ahead and finish these sides up and move on to our base. So I'm just going to measure in a little over 1 inch from each of my sides except for my hinge side, and place a couple of brad nails along the edge for some extra support. Okay, so the very first thing I noticed about this thing is there's no wind up. In my other one, you had to wait for the thing to wind up before you could put your nail in. This is pretty instant. Okay, so now that we have all of the sides put together and our top on, let's go ahead and move on to our base. All right, so for the base, we're going to stick with 5-inch wide material, and we're going to be needing 3 pieces that are 20 inches long. Since the main part of this feeder is kind of a dark brown, I'm going to contrast these colors a bit by using some cedar. And really the material that you use for this base is going to be completely up to you, just as long as whatever you're using will equal out to a 15 by 20 base. Okay, so now that I have my 3 boards that I'm going to be using for my baseboard here, there's a couple of different ways that we can attach these. You can use pocket hole screws to connect all 3 of these, or you can do what I'm going to do and just use a couple of 1-inch strips to help support everything. I'm going to be installing these 1-inch strips 2.5 inches from each edge of my baseboard using wood glue and brad nails. Attaching these strips across my 3 boards not only adds extra stability, but it's also going to help to keep this material from warping. Okay, so I've just noticed on this Cobalt that it has a multiple nail mode. So I was in the single nail. I'm going to switch it into the multiple nail, and what that should do is if I just hold the trigger down, every time that the tip touches the material, it should shoot a nail in. Let's test that out. Okay, so now that we have our strips attached and we officially have 1 single board here for our base, we can go ahead and flip this over and get ready to install our feeder on top. But the feeder can't be setting directly down onto the base because we need the feed to come out. So we're going to be building this out, putting some strips underneath of this so that the bird feed can flow out. So in order to prepare our base so that the seed will not fall off of it, we're going to be installing some more 1-inch strips. We'll call these seed strips, but essentially they are just 1-inch strips that are going to go around the perimeter of my base. And for this, you'll be needing 2 strips that are 20 inches long and 2 strips that are 13 inches long. And honestly, I'm really impressed with this brad nailer. I can see exactly where my nails are going to go, and it has plenty of power to set each one even at higher speeds. So now to attach our feeder to our base. Like I mentioned earlier, we want this to actually set up off of this a bit so that the seed can come out the sides. Now for the front, we don't want too much seed to come out, so we're going to be narrowing that opening down. So for this, we're going to be needing 1 more 13-inch strip and 2 5-inch strips. Once you have your 13-inch strip cut, just slide it all the way against the back. And then for our 2 5-inch strips, let's put those 5 inches from the front edge. We're not attaching these to the base yet, just loosely putting these into place. So with these loosely in place, I'm going to put some wood glue along the back edges of my 2 5-inch boards and along the front edge of my 13-inch board. So now with everything just kind of loosely into place, let's just set our feeder right on top in the center. Now let's make sure that our feeder is centered on both sides. We want our bottom log to be even with our 5-inch board in the front, then in the back. We want it to be even with the 13-inch board that we just put in. Once we have everything centered, we're going to attach our new seed strips to the bird feeder, and not to the base just yet. You'll see the reasoning for this in a minute. So in order to do that, we're going to be needing to flip this over. So to help to keep my strips in place, I'm going to go ahead and put a brad nail in each one of the logs that are sticking out. So now that we have those toe-nailed into place, we can just lift this off and attach these from the underneath. So these strips I want to be attached really well because I want to design this so that we can lift this off if we ever want to clean it out. So I'm going to put in a couple of more brad nails just to hold this into place. Then I'm going to put in some small screws. And for the screw placement on my two 5-inch boards, I'm going to measure down to 2.5 inches and 4.5 inches. And I'm going to be doing this on both sides. And if you're attaching this to 1/2-inch material, just pre-drill 1/4 inch from the edge. I'm just going to do a quick countersink and install some 1-inch exterior screws. And I'll just repeat this for my back strip using the same measurements. Alright, so now that we have our bottom strips or seed blockers, whatever we're going to call them, installed to the actual feeder itself, now we can install it to our base. And like I said before, by installing it this way, if you ever need to clean this out, we'll just take out the 4 screws that we're about to put in, and then we can lift it straight up. So to attach this to our base, like I just mentioned, we're going to install 4 screws. That'll be 1 in each corner of the strips that the feeder is sitting on. Just measure 2 inches in to the center of our 1-inch board, pre-drill, countersink, and install our screws. And if you prefer your screws to not be installed at a slight angle, you can always install these from underneath. Alright, so this is where we are at. Things looking pretty cool. We have our 2 side feeders here, a little opening for feed to come out the front, but it looks a little bit plain. So let's spice it up a little bit. So putting on the final touches for pretty much any type of build is one of my favorite parts. And the reason why is because this is where I really get to be creative. I can do pretty much anything that I want. So I urge you on this part to do your own thing. Think outside of the box. Think outside of what I'm about to show you and put your own twist to it. But if you like the way that mine turns out, I really have no clue myself how it's going to turn out. We'll find out here in a minute. But you're more than welcome to use those ideas. But I'm going to try to finish out the rest of this thing just using some leftover pieces that I have laying around, some edge cuttings, you know, from whenever we were going from 5.5 inches down to 5 inches, and see what we come up with. First thing, let's start with the door. And for that, I'm going to be using a leftover piece of our siding. I'm just going to cut 2 inches off of this edge, about 4 inches high, and install it so that my grooves are vertical instead of horizontal. And this is what I came up with. I'm going to put some wood glue on the back. Just going to put a little block here in the center so I don't block my bird feed. Then we'll attach this with a brad nailer. So now that I have my little country door there, let's put a little front cover on this thing. Okay, so for my front porch, I think that I want to use a little bit of contrasting color here. You can always stain it or whatever. I'm going to go about 4.5 inches up and then put a 30-degree angle on this. Give it kind of a look and use the dog ears as a part of the porch. Let's see how it turns out. All right, so this is what I came up with. I think it's going to look pretty good. But this is the piece that this was attached to before I made the cut. I'm thinking we can add this right on top. I'm going to trim this down a little bit just to add a little bit more dimension to that. So this one's 4.5 inches long. Let's go ahead and trim this one down to 3 inches long and stack it right on top. I think it'll look good. Okay, so 30 degrees on each side. Okay, so I definitely like the 2 layers here, but let's go ahead and attach these two. The main thing that you want to do whenever you're attaching these two is to make sure that this angle matches up. So I'm just going to push it against something flat. You can either put a clamp on this, CA glue, whatever that you would like. But as long as that glue is sticking, then we can get a nail in it. Hindsight now, I wish I had put the nails in from the bottom. I just need to figure out how high we want this little porch and cut a couple posts. So let's say 4.5 inches. So we need 2 posts that are 4.5 inches. So for my post material, had a piece of this 1-inch stripping that we have been using for most of the build. I went ahead and cut it down. That way it was square to the thickness. So this is about a 1/2 inch by a 1/2 inch strip. Now I just need to put a 30-degree angle on each end, and then cut each piece down to 4.5 inches to make my posts. And just a reminder, anytime that you're cutting small parts, always put a sacrificial board behind it. That way you don't have little pieces flying everywhere. So to attach these to my little top here, it's going to be a little tight to get a brad nail in. So I'm going to be using some CA glue. You could also just use some exterior wood glue for this and just kind of leave it in place for about an hour. But the CA glue is going to work really, really fast. And you won't end up with a brad nail in your finger. So for the placement for these, let's do 3/4 of an inch in from each side. And let's do 1.5 inches from the end. So with our porch upside down and our angle going this way, we want this to be the opposite direction. So I'm going to put some CA glue right on the center of my marks. Put a little spray on my tip of my post and just let that angle kind of fall into place there. This is some crazy strong stuff. I mean, it's crazy strong. We'll do the same thing for the other. Now let's just give it a little test, and I like it. Okay, so I'm going to throw just a little bit of light stain on this just so it kind of matches a little bit better, and we're going to attach this thing. A little bit of stain does some magic. So now let's just attach this. There we have it. We have our little porch. If you wanted to, you could put some little windows on the side here. Again, this is where the feed's going to be coming out from right underneath here. And then we have our back. Let's put a window here. I'm just going to use these little pieces of scrap that I cut off of this little leftover sliver from one of the fence pickets. So let's do something like this. I think it'll look great. Okay, so when you're messing with CA glue, be careful or that happens. So again, how you decorate this thing up, that's completely optional and up to you. And if you're going to be cutting small parts like this, it's always safer to use a thin blade saw, like an oscillating tool or even a pull saw. Let's get it attached. All right, so now we have added our final touches. You could always do more. You could put more windows on the side, things like that, but I'm really liking how it's turned out. Okay, so I have one more thing left to do, just really quick. This thing has to have a smokestack. So I'm just going to take this piece of scrap 2x2, and I'm just going to measure up 2 inches. I'm going to take a speed square and put it flush against the end, trace that out. Flip it over. We'll do the exact same thing. Find our mark, trace that out, making a V shape, just like this. And we're going to take a jigsaw and cut this out. So with our 245s notched in there, it's going to sit something like that. Looks pretty cool. But to add a little extra to it, I'm going to take the same piece of scrap that we've been using for our windows and just wrap it all the way around the top. Okay, so check it out. Chimney, why not? I'm going to make sure to not put it where my little lift thing is. Maybe right here. Icing on the cake, baby. All right, there it is. Everything turned out awesome. Feed in the front. Places here for the feed to come out. We even have our little easy fill station here. So if you're planning on putting this on a post, the only thing that you would do different is to not glue down the 2 front posts of our little mini porch here. And that's all that you would have to do is take out these 4 screws, lift the feeder off, screw your base down to your post, put it all back together, and you're done. As far as the Cobalt brad nailer, this thing is awesome. This super simple design allows you to see exactly where your nail's going to go. It's not all that heavy or expensive, and it beats the heck out of dragging around your air hose. If you liked the way that this thing worked as much as I did, you can stop by your local Lowe's and pick one up. Or if you'd rather order one online, I'll make sure to throw a link in the description. And there you have it. We've done it again. We have taken common building materials and even scrap material to make something totally unique and totally awesome. And as always, everything in life starts with believing in yourself. So if you ever have anything that is holding you back from doing the thing that you want to do because you think that no one believes in you, just keep this in mind. Even though I may not personally know you, I still believe in you. And the only thing that can hold you back is believing in yourself. So until next time, get up, get out, and get your build on. Imagine taking a pile of wood and turning it into something amazing. Now, imagine doing that without years of frustration. You do not need a fancy workshop, expensive tools, or years of experience. With Woodworking Kickstart, you'll build confidence and real skills in no time. So you can spend years making mistakes and learning the hard way like I did, or you can start building with confidence today. So join me in Woodworking Kickstart and let's get your journey started.